Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Thomas Endicott. I'm a senior program manager with the Renewable Energy Team at Bonneville Environmental Foundation, or BEF for short. BEF is a 24-year-old 501c3 nonprofit that supports the 120 or so consumer-owned utilities in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Western Montana that purchase power from the Bonneville Power Administration that operates the federal dams on the Columbia River. The renewable energy team here at BEF assists these local utilities as well as school districts and nonprofits that they serve. Most often, our projects involve solar generation and transportation electrification. We provide technical assistance as well as some leverage grant funding to projects, especially projects that benefit traditionally underserved communities, rural, low income, and tribal. The BEF Renewables team has partnered with Electric Bus Learning Project to provide technical assistance to school districts and utility partners who wish to explore integrating electric buses into their local school bus fleets. There are more than 50 electric school buses on the road or awaiting delivery in Oregon and Washington today, funded by Washington Department of Ecology, Portland General Electric, and Pacific Power, and many more electric buses will be funded over the next decade. Part of today's presentation will focus on the timely EPA Clean School Rebate Program, whose first applications are due in August. But BEF and Electric Bus Learning Project want to support school districts today and into the future, wherever they are on their path to exploring electric school buses. There's a lot to learn, and it will certainly require more than a few webinars. Through a contract with BEF, Electric Bus Learning Project will provide one-on-one support to school districts absolutely free. And this can include everything from directing you toward online resources, connecting you with transportation managers whose fleets are similar to yours, analyzing different school bus models and charging infrastructure, helping to assess the needs of your specific school district, preparing grant applications, and everything in between. BEF and Electric Bus Learning Project are here for you today and into the future as resources and as partners. BEF is excited to be working with Electric Bus Learning Project, and with that, I will hand it over to Neil from EBLP.
Thanks so much, Thomas. You covered a lot there, so I feel like folks should have a pretty good idea of what we are, but I'll introduce myself. I am Neil Bonsgard, and I work with my project partner, Allison Wiley, who's on the call as well, on the Electric Bus Learning Project. As Thomas mentioned, we really are here and are kind of a funded resource for you to be able to help navigate this journey towards electric school buses. We provide support for school districts, as well as trying to focus on where those barriers and opportunities are to help support the kind of industry grow in the region. So we'll also work with other agencies and entities like Bonneville Environmental Foundation and other electric utilities to help them support this kind of growing new world of electric school buses. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started today. I'm going to launch a poll to see who is here. So this poll should pop up on your screen right now. And while we do that, I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. We are going to spend a little bit of time talking about the electric school bus history in the Pacific Northwest, where and how we've seen those deployments. We'll do a brief introduction of Electric School Bus 101. How does charging work? What models are available? So you can see kind of what that might look like for where you're at. And then we're going to mention, like Thomas said, that new EPA Clean School Bus Rebate Program. And we'll try to do a high-level overview of all of these pieces. So then we are kind of seeding the ground for future conversations and resources. So I am going to end the poll. Looks like we kind of have an even split between really a really even split on all these questions. I love it. So we're about, I think I can share the results. We've got about an even split of folks that are kind of moderate in the electric school bus journey, some folks that are brand new to it, so welcome. And then in terms of where folks are coming from, also about a third of folks from school districts, about a third of folks from electric utilities, and then a mix of others from manufacturers, nonprofits, and interested community members. So that's really great that y'all are here. It really does take a village. So this is the agenda that I mentioned. We are planning on wrapping up all of our content in the hour. And I also want to say that we will be doing Q&A at the end, but please note the Q&A panel that you see, or kind of button that you see at the bottom of your screen, and go ahead and type those questions in as you think of them. We will see those questions as they come through, and we will keep those in mind as we get to the Q&A. And if we don't get to it at the end, we can always stick around to answer some more questions. We can also follow up with email afterwards. So I will pass it off to my project partner on the Electric Bus Learning Project, Allison Wiley, who will kick us off into our Why Electric and Electric School Bus 101.
Thank you so much, Neil. I love working with Neil and with Thomas. So I'm Allison Wiley, and some of you know me. I know some of you. I write the Electric School Bus newsletter, as well as partner on the Electric Bus Learning Project. Why electric and why now? Well, there's zero emissions, and that's really healthy for the kids and also for the drivers who work really hard, and for all the neighborhoods that the buses drive through. Quiet. I have heard drivers say they really appreciate the quiet. They can keep better control of the unruly kids on the bus. Lower greenhouse gas emissions. Our climate is in dire distress. Lower lifetime costs. I'll be talking more about that in a minute. Total cost of ownership, possibly lower now. As time goes by, you definitely save money, but they are expensive up front. We all know that. The funding availability is very exciting. It is millions of dollars available for electric school buses, just now made available by the federal government. And vehicle availability, more and more are being made. They are gearing into full-scale production. So there's a lot of reasons to do it now, including because you'll have a lot of peers doing it with you, and it's easier doing things together. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not an engineer, and I have had to work to understand some of these concepts. Instead of gallons of diesel fueling your bus, it's kilowatt hours. So think, instead of gallons, you've got kilowatt hours. Your power, though, in like horsepower is power, is measured in kilowatts. Really cool thing about electric is that power goes back into the batteries when you brake. So any kind of a downhill, you're gaining power. Even take your foot off the accelerator, you're gaining power. It's really, really cool that way with regenerative braking. Little known fact is that most bus yards, and Neil and I have visited a number of them, there's already enough power there in the electric services for 1 to 3 electric school buses. It's not until you're getting a lot more that you typically need any kind of a power upgrade. Next slide. Okay, so instead of an internal combustion engine, which I think all of us grew up with those, there's an electric motor, and it's really simple. You know, you go under the hood, like Neil and I did when we did our electric school bus tour in Oregon last year, and it's really simple. It doesn't have all those parts. I think it has about 80% less parts on the electric motor rather than the internal combustion engine. And as you might know, both diesel and propane, while they're different from each other, those are both internal combustion. So electric is a really cheap fuel, partly because it's really efficient. The motor is very efficient. The power goes directly into the drivetrain. And your fuel costs can go down by about 67%. Your maintenance costs go way down. There's no oil changes. There's not many parts that need to be changed out at all. And regenerative braking means that your brakes last a lot longer. So it can be a simpler life there in the bus yard. Can be. Next slide, please. Okay, so the wonderful school districts who I respect so much, who've been driving buses, including in really hard conditions for the last 2 years, all of the types of buses that you're accustomed to driving, they come in electric. Starting at the top left, I'm kind of going with who has the most electric school buses on the road currently. And Lion on the top left, that would be a type C. They have the most electric school buses on the road. They're purpose built. And so they're built from the ground up as electric. Now we'll talk about Bluebird and Thomas and IC. Right there in the middle is Bluebird. They have the second largest number of electric school buses on the road currently. And that's a type D. Lots of folks in Oregon drive type Ds. They carry the most students. Top right, that would be a Thomas built, and they call it a Julie. I've been on all these buses, a lot of us have. They're all good buses. And then on the lower left, of course, for special ed, we need type As. Bluebird, Microbird, I should say, does a type A. And Lion is now also out with a small bus, although because it has a flat nose, it's technically a type D, but we all think of it as a type A. I just don't have a photo of that. Middle bottom, that would be the IC. I got to climb on board that a couple of months ago during a demonstration here in Portland. And finally, over on the right, this is kind of new to the scene. This would be the Green Power Beast, and that comes in type D and it's purpose built. They only do electric. Okay, you can get all of these with the funding. You have your choices. Let's talk for a minute about charging, which is known to be the hardest part of going electric. Okay, on the left, we've got level 2, and it is nice because it doesn't cost too much, and the federal program will fund level 2. You charge overnight, and it maybe costs $10,000. Very reasonable. I would say that most districts tend to use level 2 because it's quite adequate. However, some prefer DC fast charge on the right, and this would cost a lot more. The federal government is not willing to pay that much. Although if we're thinking future vehicle to grid, this is often the favored, but we don't necessarily need to worry about vehicle to grid in early days. It's really not ready for prime time yet. Okay, so that's fast, 2 to 4 hours, and you have your batteries charged. Next slide, please. So as Thomas mentioned, there's already about 50 electric school buses here in the Pacific Northwest of Washington and Oregon. We're going to hear shortly from Franklin Pierce, and that would be Robin, who went first in Washington. I always respect the people who go first. It takes courage to try new technology. Next slide. So the funding has been different between Washington and Oregon. I'm a little bit envious sometimes of Washington because, as Thomas mentioned, Department of Ecology, those are Volkswagen funds. Oregon has not chosen to use any Volkswagen funds for electric school buses. So far, it's been mostly Portland General Electric, which is an investor-owned utility, a little bit from Pacific Power, and this is through the Oregon Clean Fuels Program. So that's how we've been funding them so far, but it's going to change because things are busting wide open with the federal funding. I think we're ready for the next slide and presenter, and this would be Robin Heinrichs from Franklin Pierce School District and his partner, Jeremy Stewart from Tacoma Power. Please tell us about, oh, Thomas, I think you were going to do this introduction.
I'll give everybody a quick intro. Thank you, Robin and Jeremy, for joining us. Robin Heinrichs is the Executive Director of Support Services at Franklin Pierce School District in Tacoma, Washington. He has spearheaded Franklin Pierce's integration of electric school buses into its fleet. They currently operate 1 Bluebird electric bus, but they have 6 more buses on the way. Jeremy Stewart is a power analyst at Tacoma Power in Tacoma, Washington, the utility there. And of course, Tacoma Power is the fuel supplier for Franklin Pierce's electric buses. Robin and Jeremy have worked together to plan for the deployment of these electric buses and their related charging infrastructure. And we've asked Robin and Jeremy to share their experiences in terms of initial concerns and pros and cons and the lessons that they've learned to date. So welcome, Robin and Jeremy.
Good morning. Thank you. As Allison mentioned, Franklin Pierce School District put in service the first electric school bus in Washington, and thought there might be some interest for those of you who are thinking about purchasing your first electric school bus about some of the concerns and questions that we had before we sort of dipped our toe in these waters. As you can imagine, we had some concern about from our shop about how do you maintain an electric school bus. They knew everything that there was to know about, maintaining diesel buses, but this is a whole different drive system. And what would it take to maintain a bus if we bought one, so they could be serviced and kept in running condition. Another question was, our district has standardized upon use of type D buses. And so, this was in 2019 when we made our purchase, and what out there in the market would be in a type D configuration that would also be electric. So that took a little bit of research. We also had concerns about the range limitations of an electric bus and whether it would be suitable for our routes. And then the last consideration, I think, that we were concerned about before deciding to make the plunge was what was going to take to put in charging stations, and how expensive would that be? Did we have the electrical capacity? So I guess circling back to what we found since having those initial questions and before we purchased our first bus, on the maintenance item, we went and we realized that we would need a local dealer, a servicing dealer, in order to make this really work. We didn't want to deal with a long distance relationship. We needed to have somebody, if we were in trouble or had a problem, that we could call and would come down and take a look at the bus, or if we needed to tow the bus someplace that it was in the area. So that was part of our reason for looking at a Bluebird at the time, because it had the type D configuration and also a local dealership. When we looked at even what we were doing with electric buses or with diesel buses, we realized we really weren't doing overhauls anymore on engines. So there were things that we were always outsourcing anyway. And when we had the opportunity to look at a prototype electric bus from Bluebird, we realized it was really largely a diesel equivalent, just had a different engine, no transmission, and batteries. And when we talked to the dealer about those considerations, they made it clear that the high voltage end of the bus maintenance was something that we would not be able to do locally. They could diagnose remotely, and then repairs would have to be done at their shop. So in a way, it was no different than a diesel bus. As far as range, that was a big deal. And so we really looked carefully at our district. Our district, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's fairly compact, about 16 square miles. It's pretty flat, not too many hills, and a lot of stop and go driving, which is kind of ideal for an electric bus. So it seemed like we had a good place to put a bus in service. The environmental factors were conducive, but we did have questions about the effect of weather on range with the electric bus. And with our partnership with Tacoma Public Utilities, they were able to put us in contact with out-of-state school districts that were using electric buses, and in severe climates, they were able to share with us what they do to extend the range and what we might expect on range reduction due to running the heater and wipers and the like. So based on that, we were able to be comfortable that with our first bus, that we had a number of routes that the length of the route was conducive for the range of the buses that were available at that time. The exploration of the routes was interesting because we needed to know the length of the route, but we also had to put up that up against the calendar, the school calendar. So if we were expecting to be able to charge a bit at midday, we had to look at early release times and look at the calendar to see if we could even get the range that we would need without midday charge. So those were some of the things that we looked at when considering purchasing a bus. And lastly, the question about the chargers, we quickly realized that, well, the bus that was available at the time was not capable of fast charging. And so we decided that we would go with a level 2 charger, and again, talked to Tacoma Public Utilities about the installed electrical infrastructure at our bus barn and whether it would be able to support fast level 2 charging, and really how many buses could we expect to charge with the existing transformer and the like. So again, collaboration with the local utility was key in helping us understand whether this was something we wanted to do. So in the end, we've had a very positive experience with our first electric school bus, and we have seen degradation of range due to weather, but we've been able to manage that with some midday charging. And also, actually, another thing that we learned was putting the same driver in the bus all the time really helped increase the range that we could get out of the bus, because the driver learned how to drive the bus efficiently, conserving range. So again, we've had a good experience with our first electric bus, and as Thomas indicated, we've ordered 6 additional buses. So I don't know if Jeremy wants to chime in and add to this.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Rob, and I'll apologize to everybody. I'm not feeling 100% today, so I got a frog living in my throat, and I'm going to be transporting a kiddo to his school here fairly soon, so I'm not on video. But yeah, I think the key is kind of like assessing what the site is and working with the utility. You know, right now we're still in the learning phases. Everything's going to be a little bit different as far as what type of infrastructure the specific building has. So, you know, and we're kind of learning how the pieces all fit together. You know, the installation at Franklin Pierce is a little unique because the bus barn is next to the high school and it feeds off the same meter. So when we're looking at it from a utility capacity perspective, we've got a large conductor and fairly large transformers there to serve that load because it serves the high school. So it's a matter of like shifting the load around and making it work within the constraints that we have for the high school there. You know, other applications where you've got a yard with a single, you know, small conductor running to it, you know, that's going to be a little bit different, but we're just going to have to take a look at these on a case by case and try to find out what's best.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Was there anything, or I think that's a really good insight, and we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of utility school district relationship, which I think is an important note too, that they did reach out to you early on. So then you were able to kind of figure out what the limitations were while they were in their planning stage. All right. Well, I will thank you all for joining us and being such great resources for this call. I'm going to jump us ahead to talk a little bit more about this exciting money on the table. That's why people always, it gets people in the door for sure when you can dangle these types of opportunities out there. So that's why they exist. So a little bit of background on the federal clean school bus rebate that we will be talking about today. This was part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the IIJA, at the tail end of last calendar year. It's passed in the fall. And these details have been developed and kind of been slowly trickling out over time as they've been finalizing these before the application came out. So on our end, we've been really trying to digest these, dive in, and try to answer some of the questions that we've heard from our early conversations with districts to be able to share with you all. So broad scale, the way that this funding pool works is this is a funding pool from the federal government. It's being administered through the EPA, and it is designed to accelerate the adoption of clean school buses, primarily electric school buses. And the amount available to electric school buses is going to be somewhere between $2.5 and $5 billion over the next 5 years. That's a total amount. And for this year, there is at least going to be 500 million available for the Clean School Bus Rebate Program. We'll talk specifically about this year's program, but it's important to recognize that this is just the first tranche of 500 million of this funding stream, and there will be lots of different versions of programs over the next 4 years of implementation. So this is just kind of an example of what's available in year one of this program. But if you don't get to an application this year, or if this isn't the right year for you, we still have some important steps. So then we can get you ready for future years when your district's ready for it. So briefly, this 500 million is split in half. And so half of it is available exclusively for electric buses, which are referred to as zero emission buses. And then the other half, which is called the Clean School Bus Funding Pool, is available for applications that involve some sort of mix of electric, propane, or compressed natural gas buses. So with that, you'll have more than half of the funding go to electric, but there will be funding that will go towards propane and CNG buses as well. So we're going to jump into who qualifies, because this is an important question to recognize. So I'm going to just, as kind of a general overview for these slides, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of personal questions that you might have for your district or the districts that you serve, if you're a utility or some other support organization. So there is an actual spreadsheet that based on the federal data, will tell you if your district qualifies and if your district is priority or not. But broadly speaking, who's eligible for these funds are state and local governmental entities responsible for providing bus service to one or more public schools. And what this basically means is if you are a public school, including a charter school, that largely would mean that you're eligible to apply. Indian tribes, tribal organizations, and tribally controlled schools that are providing bus service to those schools are also eligible to apply. And then the nonprofit school transportation associations, I don't think that really applies in the Pacific Northwest as much. But if your school district is served by an eligible contractor, there is a mechanism for that to work, as well. So replacement guidelines. This program for this year works in a mechanism that you are, in order to be eligible for funding, you have to have another vehicle that is eligible to be replaced or scrapped at the end of the process. So the buses eligible for replacement must be 2010 or older diesel powered buses. However, if you don't have an eligible 2010 or older diesel bus and are requesting a electric bus, a zero emission bus, then you can either scrap a bus that's newer than 2010, or you can sell, scrap, or donate a 2011 or newer internal combustion bus. Sorry, that was a mouthful. These vehicles also need to have a gross vehicle weight rating of 10,000 pounds or more. They need to be operational at the time of application and be able to start move in all directions, and have operational parts. And this is one that we can go into the details with on a case-by-case basis, but they also have to provide bus service to a public school district for at least 3 days a week on average during the 2021 and 2022 school year, excluding COVID-related school closures. So that's an important nuance that I think we're all used to in the school bus world of showing that the bus has actually been used to transport students. And that is my next set of slides. So with this, I'm actually going to skip ahead. This is the kind of boring slide in terms of design, but exciting slide in terms of what this actually means for districts. So I'll leave this up for a while. This is the good stuff. So I'm going to go back to what the prioritization criteria is, but essentially your district will either be a eligible school district, like we mentioned for those first set of guidelines, or it will be a district that meets one or more prioritization criteria. So if you fit into one of those two categories, then or one of those prioritization criteria, which we'll go over in a second, then you're eligible for the priority level on these slides. So what this means for kind of the buses that we've been talking about, if you're going for a bus like Robin mentioned, a full type C or type D large bus, then you would be eligible for either $250,000 rebate or $375,000 rebate, depending on whether you are one of those priority districts or not. You can screenshot this. I'll also send out the slides afterwards. But there's also different funding levels depending on what other buses you're putting in your application. These applications that you submit, you're allowed to submit one per district, and these applications can include up to a total of 25 buses in the application, assuming that you have eligible buses to be scrapped. Again, there's a lot of details beyond the scope of this because we want to make sure that we have time for questions in this process. So I'm not going to go into all of the details of this, but essentially the process, or we'll go over the timeline process later. We also talked a little bit about infrastructure with Jeremy and Robin and Allison. Everyone's kind of touched on that utility partnership and infrastructure question. And this is really where the variability comes in on a project by project basis. I've seen some questions that have come in the chat and ahead of time about what does this really cost a district to install? And this is a really hard question to answer because this is the piece that's super site specific. So the first question is there funding available for installing infrastructure to help support these buses? And that answer is largely yes. This chart on the right-hand side here, over here, you are eligible for between $13,000 to $20,000 of infrastructure funding per bus that's installed, or sorry, per bus that's awarded for electric school buses only. And so that amount is really going to be variable on like, will that cover the cost of what the infrastructure is? We can open that question up in the Q&A at the end, but really it's going to be variable. And the things that are big drivers of this are what is the electrical capacity on site? We've found, Allison and I with the Electric Bus Learning Project, that largely speaking, the electricity demand for a single bus charged with a level 2 charger, or kind of 1 to 3 buses, you usually are able to find that within existing capacity. And so you might have to upgrade a panel or some wiring, ideally not have to trench too far in the parking lot, because that's really where expenses can really balloon. And then we want folks to be thinking, longer term than that as well, but sometimes it's helpful to get things started just like Franklin Pierce did, where they got a bus on the road, learned kind of the quirks, and then they kind of went back into scaling mode. So this funding is available for either level 2 or level 3 chargers. And with all of this funding, if somehow your project costs came in lower than these amounts, then they wouldn't fund beyond what your total costs are. And if funding was over this, you would be responsible for the remainder of your project cost. Those are my notes there. So we're going to go back to prioritization criteria. And so this is an effort from an extended stakeholder process of trying to, is the EPA project really trying to find ways to equitably distribute the funding for this first round of buses. So I'm going to go back to the prioritization criteria. And so these are the three categories that will establish if you're a priority applicant or not. So number one is if you're in a high need school district and low income area. And so this can be accomplished in a couple of different ways, or this kind of criteria is calculated in a couple of different ways. It's primarily if you have 20% or more students living in poverty. And there's a couple of other ways to qualify in that category. The other category that for prioritization, category number 2, is rural school districts. And this is based on the NCES data if you're identified as rural remote or rural distant. And then finally, tribal school districts. So these are BIA funded school districts and school districts that receive basic support payments for children who reside on Indian land. So these are the three prioritization criteria that's going to change how the lottery works for you. So I'll talk a little bit about the kind of mechanism of how this works in the application. So this program as a whole is designed to be pretty easy. This is not a competitive grant. This is a rebate process. Sorry, I don't have a slide for this, but the way that this works is between now and mid-August, you will fill out a simple application through the EPA indicating your interest and the number of buses that you're applying for. And then what they're going to do at the end of that is they're going to make sure that what you're applying for is what you qualified for. They're going to assign everybody a randomly generated lottery number. And then they're going to go down the list of priorities and kind of spend the funds until they run out of funds. So they'll first fund priority districts, and then they'll fund the other districts. They also have indicated that if there is an overwhelming amount of applications, especially in the zero emission bus world, that they do have the capacity to open up more funding if available. So we're really encouraging folks, if you have the capacity and think you'd be ready for this, to be able to apply for funding to show that that demand is there. So I'm going to move on to kind of like, what are our next steps? How do we actually get this possible to move forward with this? So whether you're planning on applying or not, there's one kind of odd step that you have to take right away. And that's the new system that the federal government is using for doling out these federal awards. It's called the Systems for Award Management, or SAM.gov. Whether you're applying or not, it's important for you to figure out if your school district already has a entity registration for SAM.gov, or so if they don't, then getting that set up. And if they do, this is essentially the portal that is needed to submit the application. And there's only 4 people per entity that will be able to submit that application. They're listed here on the right. It's 2 folks for the electronic business point of contacts and 2 government business point of contacts. So this is where it's a really good starting point of communicating with somebody in your business office at your school district, or somebody to see if there is an existing entity registration on SAM.gov, and to figure out who that point of contact is, so then you can be ready to apply. What we really don't want to see happen is folks that are interested and then try to get down the application process and realize that that person is out of the office for some summer chunk, and you're not able to submit your application. So we really encourage folks to start there. So how does this all work timeline wise? So the first thing that you're going to do, like I mentioned, is you are going to register for that SAM.gov account. The next step is really like, we want to answer your questions. So then you're ready to know what would either a scaling like Robin is talking about or our first electric school bus deployment look like. So let's figure out what's going to be realistic for us, and how are we going to get an application of what we kind of want to see in our district moving forward. So we'll talk about some resources that we can provide in that step, but really it does involve bringing in the utility so you can understand, you know, what your capacity is from day one, and kind of if there's a scale that's workable right away, or if there's a scale that's going to involve a larger set of planning and organization over time. So those are important conversations to get started, and we are happy to make those connections with utilities as well. We're going to be offering some free phone call, kind of intro phone calls to get some of those conversations started. Then the next step, applications themselves are open. So if you have your SAM.gov account, you have that organization account and access, then you can get that application in by August 19th is the funding application. This funding is not going to be awarded based on first come, first served. So you don't have to worry about getting your application in tomorrow. However, for the EPA, they will start kind of pre-qualifying people if your application's in. So it helps them keep the timeline on track. Don't wait until the last day, but technically you can submit it as late as you need to get your application ready. Then in the fall, the EPA is going to do those kind of pre-qualifications, make sure folks are on the list that was pre-designated, and then they're going to do the lottery. Again, we can follow up on the nuances of this. It's a complicated process, but they'll do the lottery, and they're going to notify the winners in October of this fall. So it's pretty quick turnaround. Then the school district will have 6 months to work with their utility on a plan and order the buses through the manufacturer of their choosing. And once you have a purchase order from the dealer or the manufacturer, then you will submit that back to the EPA, and the EPA will pay out that amount. So then you have the funding available to actually make the purchase when the delivery happens. The winners will receive your electric school buses and install your chargers, and then you are able to hang on to your buses that will be replaced. You're able to hang on to them for 2 years. So you have a kind of a buffer period of figuring things out, getting them well integrated into your fleet, and having that backup while you kind of figure out operationally how they're going to fit and work for you. The goal of this program is to submit your closeout by the end of October 2024. However, they have recognized that with the supply constraints and long lead times for vehicles, that this can be extended if need be. I had one. Well, we'll cover some of those additional pieces in the questions. So there's a lot here. I don't want to overwhelm everybody, but there's a lot of opportunities here, and this is a really great opportunity for folks to be able to jump into this. That was the piece that I wanted to mention. So in the priority and non-priority, there is a separate tranche for this application where the EPA really wants to see these buses get deployed in those higher needs areas. They also want to see, and they recognize the value that it's really helpful to have a peer, especially a peer district that is close to you, deploy a school bus and share their lessons with you. So the first thing that they're going to prioritize in this process is they're going to make sure that if there's an application from every state in the United States, they're going to try to make sure that at least one application gets funded in every state. So I'm looking at you. We have some applications, or we have some people participating today from districts in Idaho and Montana, and there will be funding available. And so you could be the first deployment in your state and really help share those lessons statewide. So they're really trying to prioritize that as well, which is really great to see. And we're excited to help support those folks move forward. So we was able to get through those pretty quickly. So we might have some good time for Q&A. So kind of moving on to next steps. So we are, we're here to help. All of us are here to help. We're all invested, both Allison and I at the Electric Bus Learning Project and Thomas at Bonneville Environmental Foundation. We really are invested in helping this transition move forward and helping make sure that the deployments that folks are doing are realistic and are going to be a good experience for everybody. Although we love electric school buses, we also know that the wrong deployment without the right resources could really be a challenge and maybe not a great experience for you. So we'll be real with you on what's there and what's not. I'm going to put in the chat a link for everybody. So this link is an opportunity for folks to be able to sign up for to be able to schedule a call with us, so we can have that initial conversation and figure out what type of resources you all need, answer some questions directly, and point you to resources that you need, or continue to be able to provide support if we're able to with our funding for wherever you're at. So we hope folks will be able to take advantage of that. I like to say that sometimes my role in this process is to be a little bit of a translator. So if you are a district that hasn't had a lot of experience with electric school buses, and your utility hasn't had a lot of experience with electric school buses, sometimes it's helpful for somebody to come in and be able to speak both school bus and be able to speak electric utility. So translating those operational questions about kilowatts versus kilowatt hours, and helping answer some of those questions. So I put that in the chat, and it will also be in the resource email. So I will do my best to try to get a resource email coming out later today, or if not tomorrow morning. And in that, I will have the slides, a link to the recording that you can share with others from your organization, so you can kind of come up with a good list of questions for our follow-up call. We're going to want to make sure that you're checking with your admin about that SAM.gov registration. And there's going to be a lot of resources available. So we will have, there will be some specific EPA webinars that'll dive into some of the specifics. So look forward to those as well. And we'll want to make sure that you're sharing with others. And a reminder for this first round, the application deadline is due August 19th, but whether you're ready for that or not, we want to start the conversation. And I wanted to provide an opportunity for Jeremy and Robin to mention you have an event coming up. I'll put the details in the resources, but if you want to briefly talk about that event for a minute, now would be a great time.
Yeah, Neil, just a heads up. Sorry to interrupt, Neil. I think that you might need to give permission for that link so that people can fill out the form. Sorry to interrupt.
All right, I'll have to do that afterwards. So go ahead and keep that link saved, and I'll make sure to change that before you all jump in there.
Great, thanks, Neil. So this is Jeremy at Tacoma Power. So we recently got a grant for the Department of Commerce with us and Franklin Pierce School District to do a study on bus charging and microgrids at Franklin Pierce High School. We're having a kind of a Smart and Resilient Schools Summit coming up here on Saturday. That's June 11th from 10 to 2. And we're going to talk about priorities, get feedback from different folks who attend, we've got some people who are like in the emergency management teams and bus transportation teams and architects and students. So it's going to be a opportunity to kind of hear from folks and find out what they have important. And I believe the Bluebird school bus will be there for folks that are interested as well. So, encourage if people are interested to make a little bit of time and come out and join us. It should be fun.
Awesome. Yeah, that's such a really good opportunity, and I wanted to kind of echo that. If you haven't had the opportunity, any experience that you can have in person with a bus is a really great opportunity. So I know that we with the Electric Bus Learning Project last year did an electric school bus tour through Oregon to try to give districts that opportunity of getting in the bus and really checking it out. Being able to drive it around and ask those direct questions that you have. So opportunities like those that can come up, we're happy to make those connections and share those with you all. So I'll go ahead. I think we are into the Q&A section. So if all of our other panelists want to turn on your videos, I will pause the share and we can go ahead and jump into the Q&A questions that have come up so far. One of the first questions was for Robin. What kind of range reductions were you getting? I know that you mentioned that you were able to learn from that. What kind of range reductions did you get from the buses in the winter? Or did you just have to kind of plan for routes that fit well within those ranges?
We found the bus has a little range guide, and it indicates about 100 units, roughly equivalent to 100 miles range each morning. But in severe weather, we've seen that go down to about 80. So I guess about a 20% reduction in range due to weather in the energy required for the electric heat in the bus and for wipers and lights.
Awesome. Maybe this is one for Allison. With the current program that the EPA has released by continuing through the next 5 years, or will it be continuing through the next 5 years, or will it be different programs and this one will run out in 2022?
Yeah, I like that question. There's going to be a lot of different iterations, and the EPA has been really clear that they're going to learn as they go. They're going to make more and more adjustments. So this is just round one when we're looking at the August 19th deadline.
Great. I saw an earlier question from that was about what how the buses do on hills. I think, Allison, do you have an anecdote from our school bus tour last year that you might be able to share about hills and people's expectations there?
Yeah, that tour was really fun. And what happened was that I could see that Melinda with Lion occasionally was a little bit nervous because, of course, we'd be taking the Lion electric bus out onto the hills because the people in the districts wanted to see, well, is this thing going to perform? And it did. It did perform. There was no hill that the bus wasn't performing just fine on. Now, if it had been freezing degree weather plus a big hill, range would have gone down some, but the bus still would have gone up the hill.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that's something that we really see, the importance of being able to have a direct experience with meeting a bus is what we call it, but meeting or driving a bus is really being able to test it. We saw folks that's exactly what they wanted to do. They were like, I don't know about these electric bus things. They got in the bus and they went to the steepest hill on one of their routes, and they took it up, and they were all surprised. So I think that also brings up just an important question: is we're recognizing that this is not a new technology. But we are still at a kind of small percentage of the school bus fleet that has started to become electric. So if you look at your fleet and you try to find the hardest route that you have, your field trip route that is, you know, driving over the mountains in the winter back and forth in the same day, electric is not ready for you. So I'll say that right now. It's not ready for all of those routes right away. But that's the beautiful thing about running a fleet, is you have the ability to find the right bus for the right route. And what I would challenge you all to do is you will be able to think of a route that doesn't work for electric right now, but in the same token, what is really helpful to do is also to look and see if you can find a route that is right for electric. So, you know, with the buffer for learning, it's a learning process, and with a buffer for range and being able to experience it in your own on your own soil is really, really helpful.
Neil, I see a question here that I want to make sure we get answered before the end of the hour, which is, how does a district know if they're on the priority list?
Oh, wonderful question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the EPA's made it easy. So the data sets that they mentioned that they're pulling for those qualifications are a standardized list. And so they are able to make an actual list of who the priority districts are. So I will send that out in the resource document. I'll send out the priority list, so then you can know definitively yay or nay on if your district is priority or not. And what that priority means is just an expectation of what your funding percentage is going to be, or what your rebate amount will be, and then your likelihood of getting the grant will change. However, you never know. It's the first year of a program. You never know if it's going to be oversubscribed or undersubscribed. And it's a lottery process, so you also can kind of never know if you're going to be getting funding or not. So that's why they made the application easy, and whether you're priority or not, it's still worthwhile to put in the application. So I updated the Google form. You'd think that over all of these years, I would have figured it out by now, but I think that should be updated now. So if you can still go into that link, you can sign up for a call. I also have the webinar set up, so then as you leave, there's a quick survey that you can answer to ask about what future webinars and resources would be valuable for you to, valuable for us to be able to provide. But we are at our 12 o'clock, so I want to respect y'all's time so you can get off to your next appointment or meeting or lunch. But if I know Allison and Thomas and I might at least have a few more minutes to answer some more questions if others have specific questions that have popped up. And I see one question about the vehicle classes that the EPA used, a class 7+ and 3 to 6, what that means. I don't know if anybody has a direct answer to that question on what classification system they're using for their chart. Everybody always has their own kind of flavor of what things matter to them. Does anybody know the answer to that question? Doesn't look like it. I will have to look it up, and I'll try to put it in the resource document.
Robin may know, but I think generally those 7 and 8 are the class C and D buses, and the smaller, it's maybe a weight classification, but I think the larger C and D buses are those 7 and 8, class 7 and 8 buses.
Okay, great.
Yeah, you're right.
All right, well, question about infrastructure costs. Maybe this is a question for you, Robin. As you all have been planning with your deployments, I know that it's super site specific, but what has your kind of use case been for how you've planned on the costs related to the infrastructure for your first bus versus your scaling of the next 6?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, these costs can vary widely depending on what's already in place in the site. We happened to luck out. We had a significant amount of electrical infrastructure where the buses park due to support of block heaters for the winter. And so we were able to take advantage of those conduits to install an electrical distribution panel and the type 2 charger without having to really tear up asphalt. We were able to use the existing pathways We also found that we had enough capacity in the existing transformer to support, actually we have now 4 type 2 chargers off of our transformer. As we're looking to add the next 3 with potential of some fast chargers, it begs the question of the transformer. But to answer the direct question, we spent about $13,000 to put in the level 2 chargers, knowing that we were using the same transformer and pathways.
And was that the install cost or the product cost for those chargers?
That was the installed cost.
Okay.
The level 2
Great.
chargers were roughly $2,000 a piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Jeremy at Tacoma. One thing I would also kind of like key in on that too is talk to the utility about cost and do some brainstorming and kind of see what are possible alternatives. You know, it may be cheaper to bring the power in from a new service on the other side of the yard. So it may be something that you're not thinking of, maybe like the least cost solution. So, you know, come into it with an open mind. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that's also spaces where people can get tripped up is if they're like, I need power in this spot and it has to be a DC fast charger, and that spot happens to be the least convenient spot. You can make a project really expensive if you want to. All right, well, we look forward to following up with you all, any additional questions that came up in here. So feel free, I'm going to share our contact info again. Feel free to follow up with questions to Allison or myself. That link should now be live, and everybody that joined today, I saw a couple people that joined on the same list, so feel free to share the follow-up email with your colleagues that use the same sign-in link. We are available to kind of help in this next step of the process. And we look forward to kind of helping us as we all work through this together. So thank you all for joining, and we look forward to following up soon.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Robin and Jeremy and Allison. This has been excellent, and we look forward to following up and supporting the districts that are out there interested in electric school buses.